Awesome, great. Well, thank you for being here today. I'm hoping that, there's a great intro from Columbus Web Group. If you haven't been involved with them before, it's been great for me personally, learning and being connected with other professionals in the Columbus area has been awesome. Today, I have a few goals and expectations, and again, throughout this whole day, feel free to jump in, ask questions. I really want this to be kind of more of a fluid conversation as opposed to just jumping into topics and slides and whatever. So I do have a couple breakout mini activities planned for today, and then we'll be going over some foundational items about content strategy. And so that's kind of where, if anyone wants more information about a specific thing, we can kind of go improv, and I can pull up other docs, or we can explore those conversations. So yeah, today is really about kind of some foundational elements in my path to content strategy, and just kind of talking about some of the topics you guys sent me over email the last week. And then another goal, obviously, is I want you guys all to connect with each other, especially in a couple activities we'll be doing, just so that we can all grow and learn about strategy and how we can implement these specific things into our daily jobs or our daily disciplines. Yeah. So without further ado, today is going to be about conversations and activities. So we're just going to look at content strategy from, I guess, my gaze and my experience with it, and then look at you guys. We have developers here, designers here, project managers, a marketing director. So it's a really cool, diverse group. And the great thing about content strategy as we dive into it is it takes a lot of different stakeholders have a place at the table when we try to define these things and try to define content for the web, whether it's foundation brand work or whether it's marketing. So that's something that's really exciting. And today we're going to have those conversations. Next week, part 2, we're going to dive into more hands-on activities, specific examples that apply to projects you guys are currently working on, and we'll break out into small groups of 2 or 3 people, and we'll spend a bulk of the time kind of solving problems together. Yeah, so to start out, this is going to freak me out a little bit. We don't have audio, but I just kind of wanted to play this beautiful film. Oh, where's my chair?
God, I've done this a few times. What you can eat, eh? One of the big days of my life at March this year, when it marked 70 years of service to the printing industry. I started in 1945 as an apprentice, earning £1, 2 and 6 a week. That was the starting rate. I have had 70 great years. Wonderful.
My name is Bud Obst. I came from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, moved here in 2002, and people ask me, what brought you to New Zealand? And I say, it's always a woman. It was 2 years ago when I came to visit the park and saw the print shop, and they needed volunteers, and I've been out of printing for 35 years, so I thought I'd come back and see what I could do to help out. I enjoyed the attention to detail that it required, and it required a lot of problem solving, and that's really what made the job, I think, a lot more interesting. We've got millions of little pieces that we use to put together.
it seems to encourage a really good type of person to be involved in the printing. And most of the printers I know are really top-line people. And the intangible feel of type in your hand is great. The craftsmanship's terrific, really terrific. For a while, this place was really in danger of packing up.
Well, we were talking about a year ago of maybe even closing the place up because we weren't getting any young people. But we started workshops and we got a Facebook page, and word kind of spread around, and now we're giving classes to design people from the Design and Arts College. And a lot of those are joining our society, and a lot of them are coming in volunteering and helping out, cleaning up, putting things away, printing things that they want to print for themselves.
But now it's got a new lease of life. It's great to see now how the place.
Cool. So, why am I sharing this printing video? I think there's a lot of really cool takeaways from this video that directly apply to content strategy. He talked about the complex, like millions of little pieces and elements you need to pull together a document. Every little letter needs set. There's a process to it that they follow. How you mix the chemicals and the inks to define, how a look and feel of a newspaper article or a print piece. But most importantly, I think it's really interesting. Some of those processes in the printing industry they've established since 1440. When Gutenberg invented the press. They've had hundreds of years to evolve these practices, to figure out the best ways to lay out type, to figure out the best ways to edit type and copy and et cetera. And I think a lot can be learned from that industry and how we're now trying to evolve the internet and how we're trying to figure out to give it more meaning. And so, there's this big part of my path to content strategy is accepting that I didn't know a lot of the answers when I would try to design a website. I was guessing a lot of times, and I didn't know if it was okay to ask questions. I didn't know if there was a methodology to do that. And that's when I met Matt Griffith from Bearded, and he was talking about, the internet's so new that we're all trying to figure out these processes, whether it's design, development, strategy, user experience. And so I think that's really where the strength of content strategy comes in, is there's so many seats at the table and different perspectives that need to be heard to figure out what's the best way to do these things. And yeah, there's this concept in that printing film where you need to pass on the torch or assume the mantle. And content strategy is in a place right now where there's not many practitioners, but anybody can be a practitioner, even though they might be in a different discipline, if they just know a few little things, or if they just know a few of the right questions that they can ask to really get their clients and stakeholders and business leaders engaged with the design process. And yeah, the last thing, kind of takeaway from that little film is it's before the printing press, there was monks in monasteries just writing. So they could only produce so much content a day. And then the printing press was invented, and even though it takes hours and hours and maybe days to set a document in a printing press, you could then now print thousands of documents. I'll send you guys this link, but there's this presentation called Death to Bullshit by Brad Frost, and it actually has really awesome statistics on the rates that we are now publishing because of the internet. It's mind-blowing. It's like 500,000 photos a day on Instagram, or this many articles on Facebook, or this many websites being published. So I'll send that link out. But it's just so fascinating that we are publishing at such a greater rate now digitally, but a lot of times we're forgetting the context of that. We're forgetting how it represents or connects with an audience. We're forgetting some very foundational things that the printing industry has taught us, because it's way easier now just to dive in and do something and get it done. Yeah, so that's kind of why I like that video.
Yeah, we can post that link in the Slack channel.
Okay, cool.
And then I hopefully, hopefully invited your email.
Awesome. So we send a Slack channel invite out to everybody, and we'll post these links there. So, all right. So my path to content strategy, it's kind of interesting because I studied interdisciplinary studies in college, and what that means is I created my own major and I pieced together things across my college campus, and I was always really diving into like copywriting and cognitive psychology and design and computer science, and I didn't really know where these things fit together. And one of my professors always brought up this story, the blind man and the elephant, this old proverb, and it's just about, I think it's 7 blind men are feeling an elephant from all different perspectives, and they all think this animal is something different. One's holding the ear, and he's like, oh, this feels like a fan. The other's holding the tusk, and he's like, no, this is a spear. So and so on and so on. One's pushing on the side, no, it's a wall, and they just argue and argue and argue and argue. I think content strategy needs people from different disciplines because they bring different perspectives to the table when it comes to the web. Whether it's marketing, whether it's development, obviously UX or design. For me, what I enjoy most about content strategy is it lets me connect with people from different perspectives and try to give them a voice so that we can better serve the audience, people, better connect with the audiences. And it is hard, because everyone has their biases. I have my biases. So it's hard to place the user in the center, in the heart of a design or of a strategy. So long story short, I tried to be a designer for a while, and as you can probably tell by this beautiful layout, I wasn't too successful at that. I tried to be a front-end developer, and I still love coding. It's a very fun hobby of mine. But I kept searching for my place because I knew really cool things were happening in digital and software development, and I wanted to be a part of it. And that's, and then back in 2008, I read this article, and I was like, whoa, this is pretty awesome. And it kind of tied right back to everything I was learning in the major that I had created. And it talked about this concept of, that old proverb of blind men and what is content strategy, or how we're trying to figure it out, how we need more people to figure out these things. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. We'll share this link because this is a great read. A lot of things in this article and other articles I'll share throughout the day pretty much is how I became a content strategist. It definitely mapped out my journey, and even the tips and things, anecdotal things I share today are directly from a lot of these books and resources. But yeah, this really spoke to me, and I was like, oh, that's where I can fit in this process. That's where I can help provide that value, and when I work with designers, when I work with clients, when I work with UX teams. So that was really, really exciting for me to, I guess, have a quote-unquote label. But yeah, it has given me a place where I can start to really focus my work and focus on different tools and skills that ultimately help teams collaborate. Oh yeah, whoa. All right. Sorry.
It's kind of small, left in the middle.
Okay, there we go. Sweet. Okay, so one of the things for me that I believe content strategy to be is just how we define things for people, and I really like this concept that Karen McGrain writes about a lot, that users have been readers all along. We can't forget that people are reading on the internet. I mean, even consuming a video or listening to a podcast, you're comprehending information. You know, the internet's just a series of links and media sources, and so I think it's really important to try to remember that, even if it's a dashboard or a piece of software or a marketing website, we can't forget that people are seeking out something. So for me, I really try to push this idea of having a content model, you know, having a concept that is central to a lot of different parts of your web experience for a brand. And we can definitely touch on that a little bit later, but you know, trying to engage with the audience from a place of their needs and trying to give the content context that meets them with where they're at is really fun, and it can be really hard, you know, because you have a lot of different stakeholders in the process, not just on the production side, but you know, on the client side, the businesses, the business leaders that need to buy into these concepts. So why are we here today? I was really excited to get feedback from a lot of you about why you were interested in coming. You know, we've had developers, like I said earlier, marketing director, someone looking to change their career, a COO, a researcher, you know, a client executive, and there seemed to be this central theme of how do we collaborate? How do we align content goals with other people on our team? How do we explain these things to clients? How does it relate to marketing? So yeah, real quick, I just would love to open the floor to you guys for quick introductions or quick pain points about what else you are curious about in this realm of content strategy. Anybody want to be the guinea pig?
I will.
Yeah.
I am in marketing. I create a lot of content, and it's kind of a tree falling in the woods situation. So, you know, how to continue to improve that and make sure that the efforts that we're making aren't in vain. So any opportunity to either improve my content or improve the way that it's experienced by a user is really what I'm trying to get at.
Awesome. Cool. That is something that I see a lot too. I mean, I'm not necessarily producing content, but I see a lot of those challenges or struggles with some of my clients where it's like, well, we keep just making content to make content. And it's like, that's great, but you know, what's the goal, or where are we trying to, how are we trying to help these people or this audience? A developer said they often lead the discovery process for their team, and they found that they have a passion for content strategy. Does anyone else kind of resonate with that? Like, do you feel like you're the voice sometimes for strategy, or the voice for a brand, or the voice for content strategy on your projects? Raise your hand if anyone has experienced that. Yeah. What makes it hard for you to collaborate with your team, or have you ever had those experiences where you butt heads with someone on your team and you don't know how to explain it, or you're trying to look for tools to push the process forward? Is there any, yeah?
So it's not so much within my dev team, it's us trying to figure out how to speak the language of the other departments. It's really frustrating within my company, and then I'm involved in a startup as well, and so we're kind of wearing multiple hats and being the super organized one, but not so much the creative one. Just trying to get my mindset to a different area and learn.
Cool. Anyone else? Yeah.
So, working with a lot of things that are coming from like platforms, especially database-driven designs and CMSs, working with different clients and coming in, the people that are holding the actual content and the delivery of it are like the best people to help you get those minimum and maximum requirements, but then they don't understand like the view side of it, and it's always a struggle point. And then there's that constant gap, you know, just echoing the different departments and the lack of communication inside. So trying to be that voice in between, but then realizing, hey, that's not really my role right now. I have a million other things to be doing, but let me take a break away and let's talk about content strategy or content. And half the people get it. It seems more like the database people eventually get it quicker than the people that are developing and creating content, like on the marketing or branding side.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, I pretty much that reason's why I have a job, which is awesome. But I think even it is funny, the people closest to the content sometimes are the people that are up against the tightest deadlines. So they're just like, oh, I need to get this done now, I need to get this done now, I need to get this done now. Versus, I think from what I've seen is a lot of times developers are like, oh wait, getting this done up front makes my life way easier when I start to actually build it. So I feel like a lot of times when I jump in on project teams, they're my biggest allies, or sometimes the developers. But asking the right questions, and more importantly, listening and translating the brand language or translating the marketing language to content strategy has been a really good. It's been a really good strategy for me. So a lot of times I feel like I am mostly just trying to empathize with the different stakeholders involved in a project. And while I do have terms and tool sets that I use, sometimes I'm changing the language of those things so that it can appeal to the broader group for a project. Did you have a different thought? Or?
No, I mean, I was just going to kind of illustrate the same point where a lot of times from like the front-end development side of things, a lot of the like interfaces that I might be developing are kind of tied to the content, and it seems to always be like to the stakeholders, at least I interact with more often, it's like, oh, we'll get you the content, we'll get you the content. And then it's like, we get the content, and all of a sudden it doesn't quite mesh and feel the way that they envisioned, because they gave us 2 paragraphs when they like envisioned this like long tail document with like interactions as you scroll, and you're like, this is not what you gave me, so this isn't the interaction you got.
Yeah, and I think that's something, going back to just the mass amount of publishing that occurs online, there has been a kind of a democratization of how quickly anyone can publish things, but I think sometimes there is this kind of breakdown of purpose or meaning, like how do these things tie together? And 3 or 4 years ago, I was running a boutique interactive shop, and we did a lot of marketing websites, and we did a lot of e-commerce websites, and kind of we ran into that a lot where it's like, the client is, okay, I need a website, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. It's like, yeah, let's design it, let's jump right in. And the next thing you know, 4 weeks later, we're like, oh wait, what's this H1 or what's this body copy? And we're like, why did we skip over all the copy or the photos, or you have none of that? And I think there's this enthusiasm in the industry to want to like create and make things really fast without maybe trying to ask those tough questions like, no, we're not going to start until we have this done, or no, what can you tell me who your core audience is? Like, if you can't, let's set up a design studio and figure it out. So I think that's, for me, content strategy, I think, has forced me to slow the process down. And I find that when that happens, it goes faster once those questions are answered. That's especially in kind of an agile setup where you're planning things out in sprints. I really enjoy content strategy, me jumping in during these sprints and being like, oh, cool, that's happening. All right, check. All right, next, let's revise, let's change, let's move on, let's do something else. And so that process for me has been kind of a really good learning experience, how you communicate with these different groups of people. But
I don't want to get you too off track, but I know we talked about this earlier. Are you talking about how to do content strategy outside of an agile process? Especially in not even just a waterfall, but a waterfall and walls.
yeah,
Because that's the biggest part of it. Like everyone that commented, it's the same story. And
Okay.
It's really a process issue to develop the content and to deliver software that is around the content.
Yeah.
It's backwards, but it's actually the right way of thinking it. It's the old way of thinking it.
I'm not going to specifically talk to like agile or waterfall, but I think I'm definitely going to talk more about stakeholders and who makes up the ownership of a content strategy. And I think that will be a good introduction. And if we want to talk more project management process, I think I can definitely pull some more resources for next week. Yeah, I believe that's our next section, actually.
And I can talk more about this real quick.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or other comments? I think we're kind of all have a good understanding of where we're coming from, at least. But is there anyone else that might have something outside of what you see up here or what we've talked about. All right. Go back. Okay, this will bring us to a quick activity. I would like everyone to find a buddy. This is going to be a really, really painless activity once it loads. A key takeaway for this activity is just it's a listening exercise. I'm really obsessed with meetings and how do you make meetings more effective. So throughout today, we're just going to do 3 small kind of different listening type activities that I think will set us up nicely for next week when we do more hands-on activities. So yeah, everyone find a buddy. We're going to take some time. We're going to take, we'll say 5 minutes per person. I want you to tell your buddy a content challenge you or your organization faces. And then after time is up, we're going to go around and I'm going to have the person that you told, regurgitate that back to the whole group without adding your own, try hard to not add your own perspective into it. And then we'll see how well you did. Does that make sense? Cool. This is a really neat exercise that I learned from Kevin Hoffman, who designs meetings. He's pretty awesome. He's an information architect. So I'll talk about him more later because he has so many amazing blog posts and exercises that can help you guys. But cool. So does everyone have a partner? All right, I'm going to start the timer. So decide who's going to go first. Maybe yeah, cool. So it seems like there's a lot of questions as to how can content strategy adapt to different audience needs. So if you're a business that is multi-channeled or has different audience types, how do those live together? I think something that has been effective for me is working with user experience people or brand people, and that's like doing made-up personas, creating like, here's John Doe, and this is what his needs are. Is like, you can normally create those fairly quickly. It doesn't have to be pretty. It can just be a Word doc. Again, like ugly deliverables. Like just get, it's kind of about like mind mapping, like just getting ideas out of your brain, because like we kind of experienced here, you start to project your own goals or your own biases onto these problems instead of just moving quick to be like, oh, this persona has this perceived problem. How can our content help that? How can our product help that? So that's, I think, that persona tool can be really powerful. And again, this is stuff that people are figuring out. There's not, I mean, if you do a Google search, there's probably tons of templates on creating personas, but it really can be adapted to your brand, to what your needs are. That's definitely something we'll talk about a little bit later and even next week. 'Cause I get a ton of value out of doing persona work and diving into like what those needs are in terms of like adapting skill sets for different industries like the financial services. And then, yes, I have this knowledge base, but then how does that transfer? That is kind of about, wait, did we have any other groups? Is that it? Yeah, I think that was awesome. Good. I think it's more about trying to think about what those processes are. So it's like, yeah, client retention is really important. What are the tactics that get us to retain that person? And then maybe, and I'm sure you've thought of this, like, is there kind of crossover, on the acquisition side? Or, so I think definitely maybe when we talk a little bit about marketing, it's not my like day-to-day, but I definitely read a ton about marketing and acquisition and how there's a lot of convergence, but there's also some big differences between the marketing side and content strategy side. So yeah, I think we might have to punt on that one a little bit, but it is a good problem, a good question. Yeah, so it is cool. I think these groups, you guys kind of had some similarities in all of your little pain points. And I think that really speaks to why it's important to have perspective, why it's important to have collaboration. Because again, it's really hard to work in a silo. It's really hard to solve a problem when you're working in a silo. There's lots of blind spots and places that you're not going to know all the answers. A big thing that I like to push in these type of environments where I'm trying to figure out personas or I'm trying to figure out goals and objectives and strategy is, trying to just tell people it's okay to be wrong. There's kind of this air in our industry, especially in the meeting environment, where there's sometimes fear that inhibits us from finding a solution. So like, I'm never really afraid to be wrong. Like, you can tell me I'm wrong, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm trying to find a solution. And especially with content, it's really easy to think of tons of ideas. So let's, whiteboard them, or let's get them out there and tell me why it doesn't work. And then maybe that'll inspire them to be like, actually, that doesn't work, but let's do this. I find that it's not necessarily my like knowledge, but like more so just me trying to be really honest with other people that I work with and really honest about what I think might work and what might not work. That really helps find solutions on the project teams I work with, or challenges my bias because I'm wrong. Yeah, how are you guys doing? Do you want to take a quick break? Or are you doing good? Keep pushing? Keep pushing? All right, awesome. All right, we're kind of getting into this next section, keys to content strategy. Really is kind of a brain dump on my part. So I really would like to open it up to kind of questions and answers. There's a lot of different tools and processes and activities that we could dive into. I just want to make sure that it's applicable to where you guys are coming from and the problems you're facing. So again, just as a little intro, I love Ben Callahan works at Spark. He owns Sparkbox. He's one of the founders. And this is one of his quotes. I'll send the article out. But we must shift our focus back to the user. A content out approach is a user-centered approach. So it's trying to really marry the idea that content is for the user. Or it's for your audience. So asking these questions and finding ways to collaborate will benefit your audience. And ultimately that benefits your brand, it benefits your product. I think it can save, on the marketing side, it can save a ton of money because you know who you're trying to target, who you're trying to speak to, and you can invest in those things. I've worked on projects where it's kind of been undefined, and it's like, well, any business is good business. And it's like, okay, yeah, but the web now, there's, like we've seen, there's so much published content out there. You really need to try to find your people or who your brand speaks to. And you're always going to get outliers, but I think that's so key, is how do we take a more user-driven approach to design? And I think one good way to do that is through content. Kind of, I don't want to talk about this a ton unless you guys are intrigued by it, but for me, like inquiry and like Socratic method, that's kind of a part of my, back when I was talking about interdisciplinary studies, a lot of my like education was based on how you relate different disciplines to find solutions. So a lot of the writing classes I took were all about like writing thesis statements and writing like in a Socratic way, or having discussions in small groups. So kind of, I think when I start talking about stakeholders and different disciplines coming together for content strategy, there's a really good mindset that I would definitely encourage you guys to start reading about and learning about, and that's all based around Socratic method and rhetoric and what that is. It's not stuff that I bring into meetings, but it's definitely informs my thought processes and is kind of in the background as I'm thinking about a project, and kind of helps me step away from my biases coming into a project, especially switching industry to industry. It helps a lot when I do projects that are like business to business versus business to consumer versus product. So that's me thinking in a Socratic way, where it's like, how do I keep the discussion focused? How do I have unbiased questions? How do I, how am I being intellectually responsible, which is super smart, but all it really means is, am I thinking about the unintended consequences? Like if I propose something and it's accepted, could there be adverse effects to that? And that's just really all Socratic is. It's trying to bring people together, and you try to tackle big problems by asking questions and following up with questions to get to the best answer. Yeah, like I mentioned, it's not something that's overt, say, to the project or the client. But if I'm doing like a kickoff meeting, or if I'm doing a design studio and I'm collaborating with designers and there might be like a business stakeholder there, it's something that's always in the back of my head that I try to facilitate. So it might be sending out questions ahead of time. It might be doing phone interviews ahead of time. So when they come to the meeting, there's this expectation that, oh, we're trying to figure out X. Like, we need to make this decision at the end of this meeting. And the way we get there is by working through these questions together. So I don't think it's necessarily an exercise I do where it's like, oh, let's talk about Socrates and this Greek guy. It's more, that's kind of how I'm trying to frame my meetings and frame my interactions when I have like a problem to solve. Do you guys see that in meetings sometimes when there's not like goals, or do you struggle with ways to try to initiate conversation, or is there any questions on this topic?
So I just have a question, like how would you recommend bringing this up? Like for a consultant or someone that was at an agency, you're probably going into that conversation or that meeting for the purpose of content strategy, but someone that's inside an organization or a business, and they're just in a touch point,
Yeah.
meeting, and they're trying to bring up some ideas to influence their business or their peers or
Yeah.
their bosses. How should someone approach doing this method and
Okay.
these types of things? And then if you do have the opportunity to be doing user interviews or interacting with your users, how do you get this on the agenda?
Okay.
So that's
Yes.
that's a better way to phrase it.
That's a great question. What I do is I look for opportunities to do some of this in casual conversation, especially with the client. So when I'm consulting and there's normally there'll be like a client lead on the project, and then there's maybe someone above the client lead. I try to engage them like, hey, can we talk 5 minutes before this meeting? Or hey, can we just grab lunch? That's where I really try to understand the language that they're working in, and understand what their pain points are. What are their goals? Oftentimes brands and people working on the client side, they have goals that they need to meet. And sometimes the design team isn't always aware of those. So I try to build consensus early by having those conversations. Like, what would be a win for you? Like, when you have this review coming up in 8 months, what would a successful project look like? And I think that, I know it's a little subtle difference, but I think knowing that up front puts you on their side of the table. So when you go into a meeting and recommend different solutions or recommend different questions, there's kind of this like guard is let down. Like, oh, he's on my side. Like, he's trying to make me look good. He's trying to, and ultimately that helps you advocate for the user, for the audience, because there are egos. Every human has an ego. And for me, I think trying to find those united goals, and I think it starts with the individual person, and then how does this bridge to a user goal or an audience goal? Does that kind of answer your question? It normally is very informal though, like, hey, can we meet for 10 minutes? So it's not necessarily something that needs to be scheduled. They're already coming to a meeting and it's like, hey, I just want to grab you aside real quick, you know? I found that to be a really effective strategy. Yeah, and then they're normally going into the meeting like ready to go versus coming into the meeting, taking 20 minutes to get into the flow of things. Yeah, is there any other questions?
I've definitely tried to do that, sort of aligning goals with either our goals or the user's goals. I find that like if you're setting up a meeting to do that, you don't get what you need. That's really interesting that you're saying like make it a little bit more of a casual question.
Yes.
Like, what are you trying to accomplish in 6 months? Like how do you define success? And kind of leaving that outside of the table as well. Kind of an interesting approach.
Yeah, I found that people are less guarded versus if there's their superior in the room or if there's 6 people in the room, people are afraid to share things like that because it's intimidating. Like, what if I don't meet that goal? What if the project goes bad? What if the design team just wants to do X, Y, or Z? There's more confrontation versus, I think, in the casual setting, it's like you figure that out and then you find a way to voice that in the meeting on their behalf, and all of a sudden you're like a rock star. It's like, oh, yeah, he's got me. He's got my back. So I think that's where, that's a good thing. And it's not really assuming solutions either. So that's my big thing too, is like I'm trying to not assume at a solution. You know, I'm just really trying to paint a picture for what these problems are, and then what are some tactics to overcoming them. And so, yeah, I think that's where, you know, in the beginning of today I said, you know, content strategy is a series of tough questions, or sometimes it's a slightly slower process at the beginning because you're trying to build trust. You know, you're trying to, especially on a new team, or you know, even if it's a project team you work with, the client's new. So it's like, how do you bring them into the fold? How do you bring them into these conversations? And that takes time. It is hard. All right. This kind of segues nicely into like stakeholders and collaboration. I believe that, you know, everyone's a stakeholder, whether you're the production team or whether you're the client, or the, you know, again, the audience. I think there's important insights you can learn about what could be an effective content strategy. I mean, it could be a really great idea, but if there's not the infrastructure to enact that, then okay, well then it's not going to be effective. So, you know, I think this is just kind of, again, I think it's cool that we've already talked about this a lot, because I think it's something that we all see day to day, is how do we effectively collaborate with each other? Is there a way we can speak the same language or try to learn each other's languages to better collaborate? Yeah, and I think it really boils down to the people who are responsible for the project's success are stakeholders, and ultimately they need to advocate for the audience. So I think having that simple goal in mind can be a really effective way, through a series of different meetings that we'll talk about later, different types of meetings, to get people to, you know, talk about their opinion or step back a second from, you know, what they're doing in their little silo over here, to really try to empathize with the audience. So yeah, I mean, some ways that I kick off collaboration is I try to have that, like, what I like to call stakeholder interviews, kind of those casual one-off meetings, those 5-10 minute meetings, those quick phone calls. It can even be a basic email with a few questions. And again, this isn't always just with the client. Sometimes it's with, if I'm working with, the head developer on a project, I want to know where he's coming from or what resources I can tap into that help us reach a goal. And that's a really good way to build consensus. I think without these little stakeholder interviews, it can be really tough sometimes to design something or build something. And when, at least from my experience, when I first started designing websites and like apps, we would do the big composition. There'd be a lot of research behind it and thought, and then it would be like, okay, here you go, developers, check this out, now build it. And it's like, oh wait, there's no buy-in, there's no consensus. All of a sudden you're making lots of little changes. Whether they're good changes or bad changes or oversights, that's where the projects slow down, when those like change orders happen, versus being a little more intentional at the front end and getting everyone on board, even if it's a simple check-in. I recently had a project where we worked with the research team, but they were super busy. So it was literally, it was only a 10-minute call a week, but by the time they were ready to test something that we sent over, they like kind of already knew what we were doing, and it made the testing process really easy, whereas previously that process would have taken weeks and weeks because this was a huge corporation where it's like, oh, the backlog for testing something 6 weeks versus like, oh, over the last 3 months you gave us a 10-minute call every week. Okay, well, we actually just got an opening. Here you go. Done. So again, I think it's just about relationships and looking at stakeholders as people and what they can bring to the problem-solving equation. Do you guys have specific stakeholder questions or ideas or pain points on like where that might be impacting your products or your services? There's no right or wrong answer, or it doesn't even have to be a question. Sometimes I have a problem where I just talk and it's supposed to be a question, but it's not. Yeah.
I guess maybe for like smaller projects where maybe you yourself take on multiple roles or individual people take on multiple roles, how do you ensure that you're getting perspective from those different players if they don't exist?
Yeah, it's tough. It can be really tough. I think sometimes it comes down to what communities or networks you're involved with. Like Columbus Web Group, you could post a question, hey, can you check my thinking on this? Or obviously you don't, if there is sensitive material, you might have to abstract it a little bit. But again, an amazing thing about the internet and just all these tools we have now, like Slack or Basecamp or whatever, there's ways you can try to get outside feedback to help keep yourself honest. And sometimes you just need to do it yourself through, if it is a smaller project or a smaller brand project, the end goal is to create value, to leave them in a better place. And one way you can kind of do that is through a little bit of lightweight research, like whether it's looking at similar brands that target the same audience or and what you can learn from them to kind of as a gut check. I think that's kind of where those lightweight things, or maybe, I've worked on small projects where they don't even have like data or analytics, and it's like, okay, well, what can I do to figure out where they're coming from? And it is a little more qualitative research, like, hey, can I talk to your secretary? Can I talk to your lead salesperson? Or if it is just a one-person like owner, it's like, okay, can I talk to one of your best customers and get some like qualitative feedback that way and see what that might uncover. I think that's kind of what I try to do. And again, it's one of those things where, like quick and dirty and simple, like 10-minute phone call. Or next time you go to their office, hey, can I talk to you real quick about this? Because that is hard. And in an idealistic world, it'd be awesome to always have access to that information in the process, but the process is never perfect, so yeah. Oh yeah, this is just a sweet book. I'll add a link to it. Christina Halverson writes a lot of amazing things about content strategy and about different tools that exist in content strategy. So she's probably a more pure practitioner of content strategy than I am, but so it's really good to watch and see what she does with her business. Yes.
So when you're talking about consensus, do you feel like sometimes if there's too much of consensus, especially if it's something like a passion project, everyone's really excited and on the same page, makes it hard to see things objectively sometimes, maybe find flaws in what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That's really good. Yeah, I haven't had that problem happen in a while. Normally I'm seeing people butt heads more, but that is definitely a real thing. And I think that's might be where if you have the ability to test things or set up tests, testing can be hard because you need to think of the right questions. But there's a lot of online tools like Optimizely or abtesting.com, like simple tools where maybe you can try to validate your team's thinking. Yeah, isn't it called like groupthink? I think there's a lot of theory about that, where like groupthink, if everyone is just overly nice or always agreeing, you can actually go down the wrong path really easily. So again, maybe that is something where trying to be self-aware, which would be something that is like a Socratic method, like you're questioning and questioning and questioning, where it's like if everyone is in agreement, it's like, okay, well, is there someone we can bring in, an outsider or someone from another department we can bring in just to be like, to give us that maybe lightweight gut check. This seems too good to be true. I don't know. But yeah, that's a really good question. So I can definitely dig into that topic a little more for next week, because I feel like I want to know now what tactics could help accommodate that. So.
A lot of times where I see that happening is if there's a superior in the room.
Oh,
they're
yeah.
afraid to speak their mind, or they don't want to hurt the feelings of other people. So creating environments where people can challenge each other. I know that it's supposed to be for getting some results and everyone to be open and honest. Because being honest, whether it's a group of people that know each other or is probably more if they don't know each other, people don't want to be that hated person or say the wrong thing or they're afraid to speak up. So encouraging an open environment is always the best thing to do.
Actually, yeah, that just triggered a good thought about some exercises that help with that. Is you can actually, kind of like what we did, we just broke into small groups, like 2 people or 3 people. If you are seeing that as a larger group, you keep agreeing all the time about the same things, I definitely encourage activities where you purposefully break into smaller groups and actually like sketch things out, or write bullet points of like, hey, what is important content on this project, or what should the order of this be in like responsive priority type project, or what are good design patterns. So even if everyone does agree verbally as a big group, you might start to see nuances of differences when they break into smaller groups. And then once everyone comes back together and you kind of see things committed to paper, it's like, oh wait, this is actually really different from group 4 to group 1. Like, let's talk about that. And that might be one way to kind of empower that if there is like a very, very strong personality in the room. That might be a strategic way to think about like getting everyone's voices or differing opinions out into the forefront. Yeah. Okay, and this kind of ties a little bit to, I think I was just speaking a little bit to that qualitative research versus quantitative research. And this might be another tactic if there is a lot of like groupthink going on or people just agreeing. It could, data can be misleading sometimes. It can be hard to interpret. So I think setting up goals for how you track conversions or how you track your marketing data gives you a good framework for the quantitative side. Like maybe if there's an idea that everyone thinks is great, but maybe you tried it in the past and you're seeing a lot of drop-offs or whatever, people not buying it. It's like, okay, let's try something different. What does the opposite of that look like? A lot of times my work revolves around that qualitative data, just kind of the person-to-person little interviews. But I definitely, when it's available, dive into kind of some of the web tracking information, and especially if there's a research team, those people just fascinate me. I don't really know a lot about it, but again, that's kind of where I just try to lean back on the mindset of I'm just going to ask them questions. And then it's funny, when you ask people questions about what they're really, really good at, they really get excited and they want to help you. And I think it's a good way to get fresh ideas to the table. So that's kind of, I can definitely try to pull more information. Do you guys see data in your day-to-day work, or would you like to take a more data-driven? Like, what are some pain points you experience or positives you experience from trying to look at that stuff, even if it's like Facebook analytics or Google or?
Putting value to it is a challenge. I can look at what people are looking at, what's popular, whatnot, but we don't have a lot of action being taken directly from it. So, and working for an accounting firm, they want to see the results. So to be able to put a return on that is a challenge. And it's something I need to develop further how to make those, figure out what our are and find conversions in a different way.
Yes, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. At the beginning of a project, or even, again, if you're in-house at a company, setting up the ground rules for how you are going to interpret data before you see it can be really effective. So you're not just, again, trying to make it look like something, trying to make it work to your needs or cater to what you want to happen. Yeah, I think a good way to do that is just when you do list out like your audience personas, it's like you can also try to hypothesize like, okay, well, what would be one way we could track this? I really like, it's kind of a very like traditional marketing approach. It's like OGSM, objectives, goals, strategy, measurement. And it's kind of a theory of thought where your objectives should be very simple and overarching. Your goals are things that you want to attain or reach. Your strategy are kind of slightly more tactical, what gets you there, and then measurement, how do you measure it? So a lot of times at the beginning of a project, I like to map out like, oh, what's the goal of that? Let's say it's a marketing website. The objective might be something like, we want cat people to have an outlet for the best kitty litter, I don't know, whatever. Your goal would be, oh, how do we increase market share by 20%? Another goal would be, how do we increase, our web page views by this? Goals are things that you can like measure, or goals are qualitative brand statements where it's like, can we measure something like, customer satisfaction, customer retention? So those are kind of where goals, I think sometimes objectives and goals get kind of mixed up, and it can lead to confusion when you try to measure things later on. So yeah, an objective can be simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy to figure out what it is. And then, again, strategy, marketing people love to live in the strategy space because it's fun. It's like, oh yeah, let's make a sweet video that fulfills this goal. Let's do Facebook ads. Let's do this. So I think OGSM helps me like think about these things in small steps. Like, oh, that's where this fits, or oh, that's where this fits. And I think that can be an effective way to at least try to like quickly be like, what do we actually need to track? Because you can always figure out the answer later. Like if you figure out what do we actually need to track, someone will know the answer. I mean, you can talk to a developer. How do we track this thing? And they'll probably have 10 different ways you could do it. So I think I'm always a proponent of, find the right questions. There's going to be people that you can collaborate with that can help you get there. And it makes your life easier. So, yeah. I'll send you guys this article, Content Strategy, The Philosophy of Data, by Rachel Lovinger. It's awesome. It's really good. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to keep moving because let me jump ahead. Let me see what. Okay, so kind of speaking of objectives and goals, for me, I really like to try to help teams be more collaborative. That's where I see a lot of value in my personal life and in my professional career. Content strategy is just my vehicle to do that. So for me as an objective, it's like I love to inform better design. Content strategy is one way I do that. Maybe I put my user experience hat on sometimes to achieve that same objective. Maybe sometimes I hack together some CSS because it's a hobby and that helps me achieve that objective. So I think that's one way I think I would challenge all of you guys coming from different places and different disciplines is maybe try to look above your discipline and be like, what's my core objective? What makes me most excited to help people or to work in this industry. Because I think there's a lot of learning that happens there. Yeah. All right, let's try to get more into some nitty gritty. Wait, where am I? Nope, I'm gonna go to workflow. So obviously we've talked a lot about, and I'm probably, maybe I'm opening this up to even more questions, but content strategy is very diverse. It can mean a lot of things. As we start, and we'll talk about things, tools, and people, like there's a lot of different activities you can do within content strategy to answer some of these questions. It can be overwhelming. Do you guys have any questions about specific things you want to learn about that can help you in your daily jobs? Like specific tools? Or just do you want me to talk and then we'll get into Q&A? I don't care. Yeah? All right. Cool. So things that content strategists deliver. There's a bunch of long lists online. I just grabbed a couple topics and ideas. You know, content style guides. I love brand style guides. So I think content style guides are very helpful. That's trying to establish voice and tone. That's trying to establish how can photos live with text? How can video live with this? You know, what's the purpose of photos? What's the purpose of video? There's a lot of awesome research about like stock photography maybe not necessarily being effective. So it's like, okay, hey client, maybe you should invest in a photographer. And I can show you how that impacts your brand. Communication plans, you know, working with the marketing department or the brand department to help give like objectives and goals to content that's being produced, to have a seat at that table to help them figure out how digital can impact their communication strategy. CMS requirements. This is something that for larger organizations that have multiple people editing content on a CMS can get super complicated and super hairy. So a CMS requirements guide, a content strategist would actually make a document that would be like, hey, this is the type of character length for an H1, or this is how you should talk in, you know, the what you see is what you get body field, or only use these types of styles in these fields on the CMS, or our developers will hate you. So there's like some pragmatic things. Again, the content inventory is fun. It's a big Excel document. There's some tools online that can help you kickstart this. Sometimes there's search engine optimization tools that can give you a list of links. Content inventories really help you level set and take a really sobering look at current state of affairs, especially if it's a site redesign. You can learn a lot by looking at content you should either get rid of, or content that's underperforming, or content that should survive the migration. But it is really tedious task. A lot of times that's where I love working with SEO people, because I'm like, hey, can you give me the list of links? Or hey, can you send me this? Or can you send me performance charts? And I can look at it and see if there's any opportunities there. So yeah, this is kind of like a nutshell, like different documents that content strategists work on. Now, every project, I don't do all of these things. It's kind of like a tool belt. And let me go back. So for me, I kind of have a set list of tools that I'm better at compiling and putting together. And on any given project, I might only use 2 of these, you know, or I might only use 1 of these. So I think that's something where if you're a person coming from different disciplines, do some research on content strategy. See what tools are out there. Maybe you only need to know about 1 tool that can really help you do your job better. But for me, a lot of the types of things I like to do is I like to work kind of on the brand side, the qualitative research side, Like I love working with copywriters to figure out voice and tone. Is this going to be effective? Is this not going to be effective? I love working with designers to do prototypes or mapping, like basic HTML documents, kind of similar to this, where I can be like, hey, this is the content priority or hierarchy, because you can like, a document like this, I look at it. When I write something like this, I normally write from a small screen viewpoint. So it's like, as a designer, I can be like, hey, is this the right order? Or is there a visual way we can tell this story better? And it's like, oh, boom, boom, boom. Oh, wait, I don't get where the content path is going. OK, let's change the order around. Or maybe the content's off. Maybe, over time, like photos and video can be layered into like a prototype similar to this. But early on, it's just, links and text. Yeah, do you guys have questions about specific tools you'd like to learn more about, or questions about some of these concepts I have listed here?
How deep do you go into your persona research?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, these two things, persona research and experience architecture, are super, super helpful for me in the work I do. I don't necessarily, I really lean on other people to collaborate with them, especially user experience professionals. I might get a basic one done, just like a brief description, some user stories, which are just little basically algorithms of like, I need to accomplish this task. And then so name, demographic, maybe a brief description, and then here's some tasks this person would want to accomplish in this design. That's kind of as far as I take it, but that's why I like working with user experience professionals or researchers who can then take some of that and add way more detail and fidelity to it. And an experience architecture is simply like an overarching document or wall covered with research and cards and things that dive more deeply into those user stories and what those adjectives or emotions might be of a person. So for me, having those two things before I even do a content inventory or before I even do a content prototype really helps me empathize with the audience. I think that's one way that I can challenge some of my biases, because it's like, I might want something to look and feel a certain way, but being a web professional, I'm inherently biased because of what I see in the web or what I like, what my preferences are. That might be totally different than a financial service audience type, or most recently I did a B2B website for an automotive brand, and it was like trying to get fleet managers, guys that are working and maintaining fleets of thousands of vehicles. That's very, very different experience than what I would expect. And oh, cool, B2B car website. I want this huge picture. I want this sweet video. I want this. And it's like, oh, if you looked at the experience architecture, they wanted data. They wanted to be dove deep, quick into cost of ownership and all. And I'm like, oh, if I built the site that I would have wanted, it wouldn't have been effective at all. So that's where I love that. And I think that is, even going back to some of our discussions earlier, those are effective tools at challenging our own biases and trying to put content strategy or put the brand in perspective of the audience. And this can be difficult, but it can lead to some difficult questions with brand managers or business stakeholders. And like I said earlier, it's okay to be wrong. That's where growth comes from. I've been wrong sometimes, and yeah, it probably is a little embarrassing, but yeah, it's okay. That's why you do this in the process. Also, going back to ugly deliverables, this is really, something like this is really easy for someone to critique and pick apart, and that's good. They're not afraid to hurt my feelings because they think it might have taken me a long time, versus if I did a Photoshop comp that probably took me 50 hours. They would probably be like, I'll let that comp slip. I just don't want to slow the process down. Versus something like this, I can change in 30 seconds. I can change it in the meeting when they're pointing something out. So that's, again, going back to that quick, research-based type deliverables. Yeah. Any other questions about specific experiences or tools or things that you think might be helpful for you that you want more clarification on? I might call on someone, or I'll let Kevin do it.
What do you mean by taxonomy?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So taxonomy is funny. So I used to do a lot of work in Drupal, and there's actually a thing called taxonomy in Drupal CMS, but where it's just like terms that you would like can assign values to or variables to. Content strategy is just trying to classify things that kind of belong together in a really simple way that helps you establish like a hierarchy. So say like if there's a product and the product has accessories, like those accessories could belong to that product, but there might be content paths that take you directly to an accessory. So for me, it's really easy at the beginning of a project when you're looking at a content inventory to just kind of step away from that for a second and just look at the effectiveness of like a page layout and be like, oh, here's a bulleted list of like the priority. Oh, do any of these bullets have like more details or more like organisms that belong to them that we should be aware of? And that's something that kind of evolves and changes during a project, and sometimes it can really help inform a development team of like variables that might exist in content, variables that might exist in the content template, or modular elements that might exist. So like, I guess going back to the example of a B2B vehicle page, the model overview page had very specific things that were part of the template, but then it also had different things that you could consider like organisms of items. And another part of taxonomy also can go to like metadata. What does that mean for search? So there's it's basically just like a structure of information, and it can kind of be applied to a few different things in that process. But for me, I do bulleted lists a lot, and that's kind of how I educate or talk about taxonomy.
In your opinion, is it better to start fresh? So the client is doing a redesign, starting over fresh for going off of what they currently have.
Yeah.
On the research side, or which way do you prefer?
Man, I think I've done both. Sometimes you don't really have an option, but you can there's certain things that have to change if you want goals to be met. So at the beginning of a project, when you set goals, when you're talking to stakeholders, when you're having these casual conversations about what a win looks like, if you find something that's a huge red flag and it prohibits you from reaching those goals, that's where I tend to recommend this needs to change. And it doesn't always mean that you start fresh or throw away an existing site, but sometimes there could be less effort in doing that. But normally on bigger sites, it's more of an incremental change. I'm a big proponent of incremental decision making. It's like, okay, we have this goal, we find this red flag, we can't fix that now, but what are some small steps we can take so maybe in 8 months it's completely fixed? I think that's definitely doable for some organizations to take that type of approach over time and solve something. Again, going back to that B2B vehicle website, they had a really interesting problem with their copy and their photographs because it was leaning on the consumer-facing brand content, and a lot of times it would just scrape that content and put it in the B2B site. And that was kind of a red flag for me. I was like, I don't think, even if our UX flows are right, and even if everything else with this site is structurally correct, it's still, again, we're readers. It's not going to connect with them because it's not speaking to them in the proper voice and tone. So that was something, instead of scrapping the whole thing, it's like, again, the structures are solid. Let's just put in place a plan where we give those resources and tools to your copywriters. So in the future, it slowly changes. So, I think it's an approach, and it's going to be different for every client. I think smaller businesses, sometimes especially if it's a really old website, it's easier to say hey, it's going to cost you way less money and your return on investment is going to be higher if we start fresh. And here's reasons why to do that. I think with a larger corporate entity, sometimes that's harder because of the amount of people involved in making those decisions and the amount of day-to-day people involved that rely on that website. To just change it all of a sudden, there's a lot of research. Even if you change it for the better, there's going to be like a lot of people affected that manage the site. And those are users too. Those are audiences too. It's not necessarily who you sell to, but who are all the sales staff or support staff that use that, or who uses that dashboard. If you just change that all of a sudden, there's going to be a lot of kind of upset people or a harder learning curve. So.
Maybe think of 3 questions. So I'm going to put them out there, but I'll let other people.
Yeah.
On the questions. I'm just curious to know if you have a success story about doing content strategy that you can publicly share. You're an example or your approach for doing content inventory when it comes to contextual variable content. So variations, authenticated versus unauthenticated, or you have a product that has 15 different colors and you go to another product that has no longer colors but maybe material changes. So
Yeah.
your approach or strategy for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, how do you measure success in content strategy?
Definitely. Yep. Awesome.
Anyone else has other questions?
Yeah. So I'm really right now, and recent success. It's hard because the site hasn't launched yet, but it was like a really big success in how we were able to personalize content and use like test and target features without requiring user accounts or requiring login. And again, this is the B2B. It's a vehicle website for General Motors. And part of my job was I worked with the user experience team to develop the experience architecture and to develop some of the responsive design patterns, and then started to uncover content problems as we went through this process. And one of the things that was interesting was the structure of the site and of the new site that's not built yet was really solid, but we started to uncover really cool things we could do by leaning on the General Motors research department or leaning on their GM IT, their IT team, and just bringing them to the table where all of a sudden we're like, oh wait, if a B2B company comes from one of your brand B2C websites, we can actually adapt content on the homepage for where they were last. Or we can adapt location services to different variables. So we started to think about content in a more data-driven way, like, we can try to, based on our audience personas, we can try to cater the experience to them without even requiring a login or anything. Is that kind of something that, so for me, it was like mapping that process out and then working with the IT team and the research team to actually be like, okay, now how do we do this? Can we do this? That was a win, but again, it's not built yet, so it's like, that's where the tracking and the goals of that.
And then, like, listing out those variables or whatever. What does a deliverable look like? Is it just like a Word document where you put like in parentheses like, there's variable content, or do you actually list them off and show different?
Yeah, that's where I would list them off and show different options, either in like an HTML prototype, or that's where I work with user experience teams, and if they in this particular project, they used Axure, so I just worked to help document things in Axure with them. And then also like slide decks, like, hey, here's my contact, here's a slide deck that has the exercises I did, what I'm recommending. So if I did a voice and tone exercise, I distilled it down to 3 to 5 sentences of what I found, and then links to the documents if they want to deep dive. And that empowers decision makers too. If they're like, hey, oh, cool, here's this 10 slide deck, and oh, that's what they did, great, forward it along. I'm really into doing like coded style guides, like in-browser style guides for the brand and for UI elements and for content, voice and tone or other content nuances. So it's actually like coded in browser. People can just quickly go through there and see what those elements or requirements are, especially for development teams that might not like have a say at the table when you're doing this process. It's like, oh, you can send them a link and it's something that they can respond to really quickly and really easily because it is coded and it's text, and maybe there's even some like reusable patterns in that. And that would be something that would be pretty, you know, yeah, more and more I'm really trying to like do more work in browser. You know, it's like stuff like this. It would be an example of how I would try to educate on why we do certain things, or recommend certain change on the technology side, or the design pattern side. So now not every team has the resources or the ability to pull together documents like this, and that's where you can use tools like InVision, tools like Exure, things that give you the ability to you know, kind of do some drag and drop, like in-browser type features. You can pull stuff in. Because again, I think it gives you more context. You know, ultimately, we're printing or publishing in digital and in the web. Let's try to see how many deliverables we can work on in the web. So, oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about different tools, or methods or methodologies, or even like what tools do you want to learn about next week? Next week it's going to be a lot more sketching and card sorting. I'll send out not necessarily homework, but some things to think about later today. But yeah, are there anything that you would like to dive deeper into? I know we didn't really get to marketing today, so I can talk more about channels and personas and that next week. But yeah, is there any other questions or ideas? Yeah.
For the customer journey, is that like the user stories?
It's really similar to user stories, yeah. There's a lot of people are doing these like customer experience mapping that are really cool, and we can look at some examples next week. It's kind of like taking like 3 or 4 user stories, but then like looking at the whole customer experience, not just like the digital side, because then you can kind of see where digital content actually impacts like brick and mortar sales, or actually impacts an experience elsewhere. And that's again something from marketing. It's like maybe you can't. It's like, how do you set up ways to measure that? You know, is a good way to look at that. So roadmap.
I do have a comment. So
Yeah.
earlier we were talking about the data that you get from changing content. So in my full-time job, I work with a ton of business unit stakeholders. Anytime we change content strategy in like an email, and we get the data back on that, if it's positive, they want everything to be that same.
Yeah.
So that's we have a lot of business unit stakeholders, and trying to say, yes, this was great, but is always a difficult path. So I don't know how you approach that.
Yeah. I think some of it can maybe come down to the persona and the marketing channel. Like, this was successful in this space because of X. So it's like, but that doesn't mean it'll be successful here, you know. But again, it's so easy to say that versus, you know, those daily conversations of, oh man, we had X% return. Okay, let's just do that here now. Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that. It is a never-ending process, and I think that's where maybe I have the luxury of being kind of an outsider, since I'm like an independent consultant. I'm in and out, so I don't necessarily always have to live with those pain points. But I think maybe I would definitely like to look more into what strategies might exist to help with that process.
Yeah, I know we're doing journey mapping right now, because that was my resolution for how can we show that there's a greater problem, this will help here. So then I'll figure out how to mesh those together.
Yeah, I think the customer journey could be an interesting tool, or the customer experience, because then you're saying like you're not just looking at a standalone persona, you're actually looking at maybe 3 or 4 personas that have different tasks or user goals, and then you're also looking at the channels that are effective, and then you're starting to measure those independently of each other. I think that's really where data shines, is trying to look at those like micro data points versus trying to look at like all of these things that might not really be related. You know, I think that's where data can mislead you, is if you're trying to take it too big of a picture.
Yeah, and maybe in that instance where you think that the same successes may not be as equally successful applied
Oh yeah,
where
absolutely.
you let them know that there's maybe more upfront work to getting that set up, but at least they'll be able to know that this is something they can maybe apply to other instances and still see the same successful yields, as opposed to just blindly being like, this works, let's do it everywhere.
That's a really good, yeah. That's a good, yeah, two things with that testing is like either there's online tools now where you can kind of spring up simple tests. Another good, if you have access to some of your customers, talking to 5 to 10, if you have like a customer sounding board where maybe 3 or 4 times a year you can check in with them, that's actually another good way to just, again, like gut check. Like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would you be open to this change, or would this help you, or would this? Yeah, you can't word it that way, but yeah, there's a lot of researching nuances or how you can test things that might help with that. So, cool. Any other questions? And again, feel free to email me any questions or things you would like to see next week. We'll probably be in groups of 3 next week and kind of work through lots of sketching and whiteboarding type concepts to try to apply some of these elements to maybe some of your own business or organizational problems. So definitely send me what those business or organizational problems might be, because that might inform like what 2 or 3 of these things we pick out to do together. So, cool. Yeah.
Well, we have one more announcement, but the clapping.
Thank you.